So you read the title right. So without further ado, let's get started. Mac versus PC for programming coming up. When it comes to comparing these two platforms, macOS and PC, many people compare the video editing capabilities or the raw power performance, graphic designing. But for programmers, it can be a bit different because they have different set of requirements. For example, for MacBooks, the usual justification is for value for the price. It just works. But for programmers, it's a bit different because they need to dig deeper into the system and do a lot of customizations. Of course, it depends on what type of programmer you are. But in this video, we are going to talk about what OS or what type of computer is good for you if you are doing programming. So stay tuned till the end to find out what's that. Let's talk about the obvious ones. If you are doing native app development, you definitely need the corresponding laptop without any doubt. If you are doing macOS or iOS app development, you definitely need a MacBook because Xcode will not run on any other platform. So you have to stick with the MacBook. If you are doing Windows native app development, you need a Windows machine. There is no other way. You still can do virtualization, like install a virtual machine on a MacBook and start doing development, but I do not recommend because the performance can be very low. So try to stick with the platform that you are doing. But if you only need to compile your application to another platform like a Qt application or a Xamarin or even React Native, you don't necessarily need two laptops. Get the laptop that you need for your main task and then give it to a friend or use another computer to do the compilation for the other platform. The second thing is, if you are planning on using your laptop to another task, for example, if you need to do gaming on a laptop, you definitely need to go with a Windows platform, not a Mac, because you cannot really game on a Mac. You can't call it gaming, it's just like some bunch of crappy games. So you need to go with a Windows platform. Then these laptops can be expensive because to do gaming you need a dedicated graphics card. Then it can get expensive because I have a Dell XPS 15. I think I paid around 2,500 euros for this, but with the same specs for a MacBook it will be more than 3,500. So it's still way cheaper. But to do normal programming, you don't really need a dedicated graphic card, and not even this kind of powerful machines. You can survive with 4-core i5 laptop without any problem. I got a dedicated graphics card because I need to do video editing. Talking about video editing, both of these laptops are capable of doing video editing either with Premiere or even with the DaVinci Resolve without any problem. But you need a dedicated graphics card, as I mentioned. But if you want to get a powerful dedicated graphics card for your MacBook Pro, that can be so expensive, more than 3,000 euros. So think about that as well. Talking about price, the third thing is MacBooks are usually expensive compared to Windows machines, in average. For normal laptop, if you want to do only programming, you can survive with around 1,000 euros, even less than that. But if you want to do the programming, on Mac system, you have to buy another, let's say MacBook Air or even a MacBook 13, which can easily pass 1,500. Those things out of the way, let's talk about the differences. The major difference between these two laptops are, like Mac OS and Windows, is the kernel. Mac OS runs on a Linux kernel, just like other Linux distributions like Ubuntu, Fedora, Debian and whatnot. But Windows has a Windows kernel. So obviously they are different. If you don't know what a kernel is, it's actually the core of any operating system, which is responsible to talk with the hardware and give all the responses to the high level applications like the GUI of your operating system or even the terminal. Talking about terminal, I think that's one of the first things that you see as a programmer. If you haven't seen a terminal, probably you are not a real programmer. Just kidding. No, yes, that's true. So in macOS, you have a proper terminal and which you can run almost all the Linux commands without any problem. But on Windows, as we usually know, it has the command prompt, which we all hate. But recently they introduced the PowerShell. I think it's the PowerShell. It means like to change Windows settings, but that's not what I'm talking about. There are other tools that enables you to run Linux commands on a Windows machine. For example, you can install something like MinGW, like minimum GNU for Windows, or Cygwin, which I don't know what the abbreviation is, which both of these tools enable you to run Linux commands on a Windows machine. For example, if you need to use pthreads, which is the native threading system on a Linux platform, you still can run code that uses pthread on your Windows machine. And that was really good for a very long time. There are some limitations for sure, but you can still test a lot of things on a Windows machine without any problem. For testing, it was really good. But recently on Windows 10 later updates, they introduced something called WSL, like Windows Subsystem for Linux. If you haven't heard about it, it's just a abstraction layer between Windows and any other Linux host. You can install Ubuntu or any other, not any other, but there are several options that you can choose from the Windows Store. And this layer will bridge the gap between this Linux and the Windows operating systems. It's not a virtual machine, so don't get it wrong. It's not a virtual machine. It's way faster than that. It takes only a few seconds to boot it up, and the file operations are very fast. And you can run all the Linux commands there. That's very cool. Like, it's just another Ubuntu or similar distribution on Windows, running on Windows. I developed many projects on WSL and it works perfectly fine, unless for GUI applications. I try to compile some Qt applications on WSL. It works fine, but to run the GUI, you need to install the X server on your Linux side and the X client on the Windows side. Then you can actually run the GUI from the WSL. But the GUI, it's very ugly. So I wouldn't really recommend, at least for the moment, to use WSL to do GUI development. But for all the other stuff, that still works. So many of the people, like programmers, hardcore programmers, they scold, they scream at Windows for not having a Linux terminal. But now it's not the case. So if you are someone like that, go and check WSL and it will surprise you. And for Linux, almost all the things are files in the system. But on a Windows, it's not quite that. If you want to change something on a Linux, most probably you have to change a file and add some stuff into file or even file descriptors. That should do it. But on a Windows, there are stuff everywhere. There are stuff on files, there are stuff on the Windows registry, and there are stuff on some settings which I don't know where is stored, but it can be very tricky. So it's a bit different, and that's why we face a lot of problems when we install dependencies. Talking about dependencies, that's one of the major bummers for software developers. At least for me, I hate installing dependencies. If it's working fine for the first time, everything is good, but usually it can go wrong because of the versions of the dependencies. For Linux based systems, including Mac, they have inbuilt tools to do that. Usually you have to download some libraries, put it into a folder, and add that particular folder into the path variable. But in Linux, they have automated commands for that. In Mac, they have a command called brew, like brewing beer and stuff. It will download the source code and compile it to your MacBook and put the files into the path, and everything works perfectly fine. But on Windows, it's a bit tricky. You have to still download the exe or MSI files, install the software, and sometimes it adds to the path, but sometimes it's not. Then you have to add it manually. And some of the cases, the worst one is that you have to restart the computer because the path and all the settings will be updated in the registry and you need to restart, but not in the Linux system. Most of the cases, it's not the case. Most of the cases, it's not like that. But of course, if you are using Python development, pip is available for both of these platforms. If you are doing web development, npm is also available for both of these platforms, and also Composer for PHP based applications are also available for both of these platforms. But not like the build tools like Make, G++. These kind of tools are not available by default. You have to install separately. In Windows, it can be a bit of a pain. In using MinGW and Cygwin, it kind of helps, but I found this really nice tool called Chocolate, which is like brew on Mac. You just have to say choco install make, and boom, it just installs. And it's so cool, it works perfectly fine, and it will not screw up with your all the applications. Talking about dependencies as well, it's so easy to install a dependency on a Linux based system, Mac or even any other Linux. But in Windows, it's not that easy to install a dependency. But I find it very difficult to remove a dependency on Linux system because everything is everywhere, right? It's a user/bin, user/lib, and there are commands you can still say, yeah, brew uninstall. But if you screw up something, everything will be screwed. You will be damned and probably spend a lot of time just in uninstalling. But on Windows, usually they are installed into a folder and you just have to delete the folder and everything is fine. Usually it's the case. So installing is easy on Mac, uninstalling is easy on Windows. Talking about path variable, if you don't know what path is, just imagine that. So you go to the terminal or any other GUI application like IDE, you type a command, let's say Python or make or CMake, whatever. So it has to find this command in the operating system. So path is a list of paths, like the folder names, where this particular command should be scanned. So whenever you say Python, it scans this path and tries to find where this Python command resides. On Linux systems, you basically create an environment variable, it's usually there, called path, and keep on appending the path that you need to add. On Windows, at least it used to be very bad, but now in Windows 10 they improved a lot the way that we define environment variables. You can simply go to the control panel and add environment variables, and especially in the path, it used to be a long string but nobody can read, and I ended up having duplicate paths a lot, and sometimes there are conflicts and it was horrible. But now they have a very clean list that we can update and see the paths in the path variable without any trouble. I think in that way Windows is way better than a Linux system in updating the path. Also, you run these commands using a shell, right? So there is bash, there is ZSH, and there are a lot of other shells for a Linux system. Usually the most popular one is bash, but now in new macOS systems they use ZSH. On Windows there is no concept called bash, it's usually the CMD prompt. So on a Linux system you can create profiles for your shell, for example bash RC or bash profile. So whenever you open a shell like a terminal instance, for example, it will run this script and it will do a bunch of stuff. If you need to initialize some environment variables, if you need to run some scripts whenever you log into the terminal, then you can do that. Very recently I found that you still can do it on Windows, surprisingly. Yeah, I was so surprised that I didn't know that you can create profiles, same like Linux but in a different way. You can create profiles on a PowerShell or even WSL, where you can initialize these environment variables, run some commands. That's perfect. One of the use cases that I have is I have Powerline installed. If you don't want what Powerline is, it's like this cool update to the terminal that it shows the Git branch that I'm in and how many commits behind and ahead I am. It's really cool. I will also keep a link in the description if you want to try it out. Surprisingly, I didn't know that it works for Windows, but it does. Especially for WSL, without an issue it works because it runs on Ubuntu. But for PowerShell, it works perfectly fine. I tried that and it's awesome. And one another thing is, if you need to create Python environments, then you need to call a command called source the activate script. But on Windows I don't find it, so it can be a very tricky to switch between these two platforms. Sometimes I try to source on a Windows and it doesn't work, and it can be very tricky. But how often will you start your Python environment? So shouldn't be a big problem. The last thing that I want to talk about is the IDEs, integrated development environments. It's just nothing more than a simple text editor. You can do almost all the coding on a simple text editor. But most of the IDEs have more sophisticated features like auto-complete, refactoring, building, debugging, running, deploying, and whatever you think that's there in an IDE. But also don't really install all the possible plugins for the IDE because it will slow it down. Most of the IDEs are supported in almost all the distributions. Windows, macOS, or any other Linux platforms, they are supported. The topmost IDEs that I'm using is PyCharm and VS Code. Both of them are supported on Mac and Windows without any problem. But there are some strange behavior that I found with these IDEs. For VS Code on Windows, it uses around 300 megabytes, while on macOS it only uses around 75 megabytes, which was very strange. All the plugins were disabled, but still Windows was taking a bit more memory than the macOS. But on the other hand, I use PyCharm. On Windows it uses around 700 megabytes, but on Mac surprisingly it uses 1.3 gigabytes. All the plugins disabled as usual. So I was surprised. I don't know why it takes a lot of memory. maybe because of the different implementations for different platforms. So just make sure that you have enough memory to run these IDEs, and also don't enable all the possible plugins, because sometimes it can also increase the memory usage. But there can be specific IDEs that you are going to use. For example, if you are doing microcontrol programming, like Arduino programming, or Raspberry Pi not Raspberry Pi, but Arduino or microchip programming, you definitely need this particular IDE. Make sure that particular IDE is supported in the particular operating system that you are going to use, because most of the applications are supported in Windows, because they usually target Windows, not Mac. So make sure that you have that as well. And also, good IDEs don't make good programmers. So IDE is just a tool. So you need this to do programming. Here is a bonus point. I'm calling this a bonus point because I almost forgot. It's about the keyboard. This is a 2017 MacBook Pro, and it has the famous butterfly keyboard, and it sucks. This is the Dell XPS 15 2019 model, and this is one of the best keyboards that I ever tried on a laptop. If you are doing a lot of programming on the laptop, I mean using the inbuilt keyboard, probably you have to think about that as well. If you are not using an external keyboard, probably Windows laptops or PCs have a better option. If you are using Surface products as well, if you know, the Surface Book 2 also have a really good keyboard, and most of the Lenovo laptops also have really good inbuilt keyboard. So think about that, because you will be spending a lot of time typing on the keyboard. So yes, MacBook has a very big trackpad. I'm not quite sure that you will be using it a lot, because you are a programmer, right? So probably think about that as well. So get a laptop with a really good keyboard, otherwise you will hate programming. So those are the differences that I could find, at least as a software engineer, because people can say, okay, this looks fine, this is most faster, but that's not relevant most of the cases, right? Because some people can say, okay, the benchmarks are higher for this particular laptop, so it is fine. I've seen some people comparing the compile times, let's say Firefox compile on a Mac and a Windows, saying, oh, the Mac is 1 minute faster. But people forget, it's a clean build. How often that you are going to do a clean build? If you are doing a clean build all the time, then you have a problem, not the computer. So make sure that you use the tools in an optimal way. So you cannot really complain the computers. Of course, you cannot really do programming on a dual core computer. It will be super slow, but at least i5 is fine. i7 is really good. i9 could be an overkill, but if you have some application that needs more CPU power, definitely go for that. Also think about the upgradability. Imagine that you are doing simple Python and web development now, and you suddenly think of, okay, I should do machine learning or big data analytics or data science. Then you need a bigger memory for to do all this stuff. If you have a MacBook Pro, and if you have, let's say, 16 gigabytes of memory, that won't be enough. Then you have to upgrade, but you can't upgrade. But if you have a Windows system, usually most of the laptops or even PCs can upgrade memory. So if you want to upgrade the memory, you can do that. If you want to upgrade the SSD, you can do that. If you want to upgrade the Wi-Fi card, you still can do that. If you want to upgrade the CPU, no, you can't do that. But still, you get the point. You can upgrade most of the components that usually affect the system performance in a PC or a Windows machine, but not on a Mac. And there are a lot of variations that you can try to find for most of the requirements. If you want to do both video editing and gaming, there is a different one. If you only want to do gaming, there are several set of gaming laptops. Of course, in a gaming laptop, you can do programming. If you want to do GPU programming, like, I don't know, CUDA programming, you definitely need an NVIDIA graphics card, which is not there for MacBooks. They only have AMD graphics card. So then you need to go with non-Mac solution with NVIDIA graphics card. So think about those things as well. If you don't know what CUDA programming is, it's kind of a high performance programming concept that you use the GPU, not the CPU, the GPU, the graphics card, to do the calculation. That is mostly used for cryptocurrency, encryptions, and also rendering related programs. So yeah, then you need definitely something other than a MacBook. So think about that as well. So the final thoughts. I hate to say this, but it actually kind of depends on your requirement. But let me break it down for you. If you do native app development for Apple devices, then you definitely need a Mac system. Could be a MacBook, could be a iMac, or if you have more money, it could be a Mac Pro. You need a Mac. If you do native app development for Windows, then you need a Windows machine. If you only want to do mobile app development for Android, then either of these is fine. If you want to do cross-platform mobile app development, like using Xamarin or React Native, either of these are fine. Then you only have to transfer the file into another system. Maybe you could be a friend or a colleague and do the compilation there. Don't buy a completely new laptop just to do the releasing of your application. But maybe it's worth if you're doing professional grade app development. If you're doing web development, both of these platforms are really fine. There is a myth called like web development is so easy and so good on a Mac. No, it's not like that. To do web development or any kind of development, you need this, not a MacBook or a PC. So yeah, there is nothing like that. Both of these laptops are really good for web development as well. Yes, there can be slightly differences in the libraries that you're going to use or the way that you install the dependencies, but still both of these can do it perfectly fine. And finally, think about the price. MacBooks are so expensive. Yes, they look kind of elegant and high class and whatnot, but if you're in a tight budget, could be you are a student or even beginning to do programming, please do not go with a MacBook. Try to stick with a Windows machine. But if you really want to go for a MacBook, yeah, who am I to tell? Go with that. But you can find a really good Windows machine for a cheaper price if you go with a PC. And also you can install Linux if that's what you are looking for in a PC. You don't need to pay extra thousands of euros or dollars or whatnot for the Linux experience. You can do it here. Either dual boot or WSL is good. One last final bit that I want to mention is think about if you really need a laptop or not, because these days we are anyway stationed at a desk. And even other than that, if you really need a powerful computer, you are better off with a PC, like a desktop computer, than a laptop, because you can really upgrade almost all the components in a PC, including the CPU. And you can have a powerful graphics card and it will have really good thermal performance. But on a laptop, it's not the case, because it can easily heat up and there is a limit that it can perform. So if you are doing high performance computing, could be game development, I think you are better off with a desktop PC. If you are going to go with a Mac PC, you can go with Mac Mini, but it doesn't have dedicated graphics card and you have to plug an eGPU for that. It can still cost a lot. And you can go for the Mac Pro, which will cost you a lot, more than 5,000 euros, and I think it's an overkill. But for a really good gaming grade computer, you can buy it for 1,000 to 1,500 or even 2,000 euros, and a really good computer to do gaming and all the programming, high performance programming that you are going to do. So that's the end of this boring video, and if you are bored, you already know what to do. And if you are hyped about all this stuff that I explained, give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel and hit on the bell notification for all this kind of crazy stuff in the future. Stay home, stay safe. I will catch you in the next one.